Hello there, my name is Tommy Bonas, and in this series I will be analyzing existing ancient Hellenic battle scenes in movies or other popular media and react to their accuracies or inaccuracies. In this part of the analysis of Troy, I'll be looking into the beach battle scene and the duel between Paris and Menelaus. So, we start off by seeing Achilles' ship reaching the shores of Troy ahead of the rest of the Achaean fleet. Now, there are two issues with the sails of Achilles' ship. One is that it has a lambda drawn upon it instead of a mu, which would stand for Myrmidons, the name of his army and people. And the second is that his sails are black instead of brown, as brown was the color that the Myrmidons wore. The reason for this traces back to the origins of their name and the mythical roots of their heritage. Hera had afflicted the island of Aegina with a plague due to the fact that the island itself was named after one of the lovers of Zeus. That is when the king of the island and his mother prayed to Zeus for a way to repopulate the island. In turn, Zeus transformed the ants, which were unaffected by the plague, into people, and hence the Myrmidons arose. As their ship approaches, the Myrmidon army is met by a barrage of flaming arrows. Now, the very first mention we have of these arrows being used in ancient Hellenic literature is when Herodotus describes the Persian army besieging the Acropolis in 480 BC. This is anywhere between 1,000 to 1,300 years after the events of the Trojan War, if not more. I also find it inaccurate that the Trojan archers are wearing headbands instead of proper helmets, as the top of their head needs to be protected by incoming projectiles. Now, after his ship docks, Achilles is first to disembark, which is probably not a good idea if we take the prophecy of the oracle Calchas into account, but more on that later. Achilles this time is wielding two spears, a shield, and his sword, similar to Bogrius in his previous duel. Once again, he should be carrying a dory, a sword, and perhaps a javelin, which Greeks called akon. Also, it should be mentioned that Achilles' dory was not a run-of-the-mill spear. It was one passed down to him by his father Peleus, and was made of Pylian ash, which was a material that was said to make it heavy enough so that only Achilles had the strength and skill to wield it. Additionally, his sword would be stowed either on his back or tied to his thigh, and not inside the strap of his shield. So as we move on, we see arrows claim many Myrmidons who don't really seem to be properly carrying their shields. This, of course, until Achilles calls for a shield formation. Now, seeing this tiny force of Myrmidons, I must mention that Achilles commanded 50 ships, what is most likely 120 men per ship, which means a total force of about 6,000 men. Also, the design of the shields are rather plain, and the Greeks sought beauty in all things, including their armor and weapons. Now, the shield wall proves to be quite successful, allowing the Myrmidons to approach the front lines of the Trojan army. Shortly after, the Myrmidons decide to break their formation and charge in. Now, the shield bash would hardly impel someone into a wooden spike, especially considering that the Trojan armor appears to be an iron-plated linothorax, but I'm not sure. I do love the shield strike by Achilles, though. The shield in Greek was called aspis or hoplon, and the latter translates to weapon, so it was also used for offensive purposes. Trojan reinforcements then begin to arrive, but they do so on horseback. This is inaccurate due to the fact that horses were exclusively used for chariots during the time. Moving on, we have plenty of shaky cam and quick cuts, but we do see a Myrmidon killing a Trojan with a stone, which was used at the time. Finally, a second ship arrives, and I wonder who's leading it. Oh boy. So let me take this opportunity to say that no matter how accurate or inaccurate a movie is, I always appreciate the display of ancient Hellenic culture, which is why I try to be positive in these reviews and avoid any negativity or cynicism. It's the effort that counts, and the creative license of writers and directors should allow them the freedom to express their creativity. That being said, what have they done to Ajax? It's like they teleported a Germanic-era warrior into the Trojan battle. Where is his infamous 7-layer oxhide shield? Why does his armor expose vital areas of his body? Why is he wearing a headband and not a proper helmet? Come on, a rock tied to a stick? What's even funnier is the fact that the Trojans seem to be just as perplexed as I am. These Trojans never expected to have to deal with a two-handed mace during the Mycenaean era. Ajax, also known as Eas, was a giant man who was rather actually soft-spoken. He only talked when absolutely necessary, and he was more so of a defensive, strong, but resilient warrior. In fact, he was the only hero to fight in every single battle in the Iliad, and probably wore an armor akin to the Dendro panoply, which is why he was built like a tank and so feared by the Trojan army. Now, of course, almost none of the characters of this film resemble the characters of the Iliad, but this is almost an antithesis to the source. Now, back to the fight, and we see Achilles spiking a Trojan warrior down with his spear as he charges in with his sword. I love how his strikes instinctively go for the throat of the enemy. Wait. Let's go back to Ajax and see the only warrior never to have been injured in the Iliad be stricken in his character introduction. So he knocks two horsemen off their steed and then casually drops his shield, which he didn't really know why he was carrying in the first place. The upside is that he can now properly wield his two-handed mace. Next, we get a close-up to Achilles in battle, lightly tapping some Trojans with his sword as he places his shield behind him just at the right time. Now, it would have been great if he placed the shield on his back during his duel with Bogrius, but at least they got it right here. I also love how he uses everything from elbow strikes, quick changes of position, to even airstrikes in order to slay the foes around him. As Achilles sees Ajax gaining pace, he charges in with even more motivation, this time wielding two swords instead of one. We don't have any mentions of dual sword-wielding warriors in the Iliad, but it isn't out of the question. Now, I gotta say, I really hate the overuse of the shaky cams, close-ups, and multiple cuts. Brad Pitt proved, at least to some degree, to be able to execute his choreography, so they should have given him a bit more leeway to display his skills. Finally, we have a bit of foreshadowing to the final duel, and that's it. Achilles reaches the Temple of Apollo, causing the Trojans to retreat back behind their city walls, which is an accurate part of the battle. Overall, this fight scene had a bit more Hollywoodisms than I would prefer, but it was mildly entertaining. Not great, but not terrible either. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. But Ajax.
Look how they massacred my boy.
Now, in case you're wondering what really happened when the Achaeans reached the shores of Troy, a prophecy by the oracle Calchas mentioned that the very first man to lay foot on Trojan soil would also be the first to perish, and that ended up being Protesilaus, who was slain by none other than the Trojan prince Hector. Achilles then disembarked, and he slayed the son of Poseidon, who was named Kyknos, and this caused the Achaeans to rally behind him until they reached the Temple of Apollo, after which the Trojans sustained heavy losses and retreated back behind their city walls. Now let's move on to the monomachy between Paris, who is the Prince of Troy, son of Priam, brother of Hector and kidnapper of Helen, and Menelaus, the king of Mycenaean Sparta, the son of Atreus, brother of Agamemnon, and rightful husband of Helen. Paris, who is played by a young Orlando Bloom, puts on his helmet and readies himself for battle. He will be fighting Menelaus, who is played by Brendan Gleeson, which is an odd casting choice, but I digress. Now, the armor worn by Paris appears to be a Byzantine-esque interpretation of Mycenaean armor, and this helmet is missing the horsehair crest that Homer mentions explicitly during this scene. The expression of war shown in the visage of Orlando Bloom is actually perfect. Paris did not want to fight this duel, and he was actually pushed to do so by his brother Hector in hope that this would bring the war to an end. Mind you that by the time of this duel, 9 years of war had already passed. Now, the cocky smirk and the overall attitude by Brendan Gleeson does not rightfully display the character of Menelaus. Menelaus was a man of few words. He was mentioned as being honorable, someone who spoke the truth, someone who was courageous. He was not an exceptional warrior by any means, but he didn't shy away from battle. His armor also would probably be a bronze cuirass rather than a linothorax, and I'm not sure what they have him wearing on his feet here. Look like worn out sneakers. But let's begin with the duel. Now, the two warriors are already wielding swords instead of spears, which would have been the more accurate first weapon of choice, and the duel begins. I must say, I do like the design of Menelaus' shield. Never mind, I hate this duel. No, but seriously, that shield is part of his lineage and a part of his heritage, and Menelaus is a king. The very first thing that you're gonna have the noble Menelaus do is toss away his shield. The only decent example I can give as an analogy is the connection that warriors of later eras had with their swords.
You took my father's sword!
Imagine, if you will, that King Arthur was about to duel an opponent, and he threw his Excalibur to the side. Even if he was not going to use or unsheath the sword due to his opponent being unworthy, he would not disrespect his weapon in that manner. The shield was the most important weapon in the arsenal of the ancient Hellenic warrior. When Achilles receives the armor and weapons from the god Hephaestus, the sword is described in a single line, whereas the shield is described in 130 lines. If you wanted to have Menelaus taunt Paris, he could have placed the shield on his back, he could have thrown his dory aside, literally anything else. Anyway, Menelaus begins with some wide sword swings, mostly hitting Paris' shield, and even channeling Luke Skywalker there for a bit. Seeing as his attacks are unsuccessful, he proceeds to kick Paris in order to break his guard, which causes his helmet and shield to fall off. Helmets were tied underneath the warriors' chins with a strap so that they wouldn't fall off during battle, but more on that later. If we were to analyze the kick itself, the front kick in Pankration would either be called gastrizing, which was one done to the stomach with the balls of the foot, or it would be called apolactisma, which meant to push the opponent away, similar to what is now referred to as the Sparta kick, or the one that we see Menelaus doing here. Paris thankfully picks his shield back up, but then gets punched in the face. But it is a nice show of desperation here by Orlando Bloom, and it's in his choreography, which is great. Tossing your opponent's shield, now that's acceptable. This barehanded punch by Paris looks like it would hurt his hand more than it would hurt his opponent, and it really didn't look like it had the force to cause Menelaus to spit blood. And yes, the slash on the leg, often displayed in Hollywood movies where the hero is injured but not defeated. Now Menelaus knocks Paris down and slowly, and I mean very slowly, ends up being surprised that a man wouldn't want to die. And that pretty much does it. Paris would later be saved, and Menelaus, after the Trojan War, would return to Sparta with his wife Helen and live a long and happy life. So, what really happened during this duel? Paris, aka Alexander, throws his spear, which bends on the point when it hits the shield of Menelaus. Menelaus would then return the favor, throwing his own spear, but only after praying to Zeus to grant him revenge. Now Menelaus' spear would pierce through Alexander's shield, penetrate his cuirass, and even tear the tunic underneath. It only narrowly misses Paris himself, who pulled back and saved his life by doing so. Menelaus would then draw his sword and pray once again to Zeus to grant him his revenge and slay Paris. He swings, but strikes the horn of Paris' helmet, and this caused his sword to shatter. Menelaus, in his despair, dashed in, grabbed Paris by the helmet, and ridiculed him by dragging him about in the area of the duel. Then, the goddess Aphrodite, feeling pity for Paris, decides to intervene. She cuts off the chin strap, allowing Paris to be freed from his helmet, surrounds him by a thick mist, and sneaks him out of the battle and back to his chambers in the palace. After this, Menelaus would then be stricken by an arrow, injured but not killed, and chaos would ensue. Other than Orlando Bloom's great acting in the duel, there really aren't many redeeming qualities. The fighting doesn't look too obviously scripted, which is always a plus, but it's still very unrealistic and inaccurate. I'd say overall a 3 out of 10. And that concludes episode 2. Stick around for part 3, where I'll be taking a look into the duel of Hector and Ajax. Oh god. And then the duel between Hector and Patroclus. One last thing I'd like to mention is we do have a new Patreon page, which is live. If you'd like to support the channel and the effort of reviving the ancient Hellenic martial art of Pankration, give it a look. Also, if you have any suggestions for the Patreon page, please let me know. Cheers, and I'll catch you in the next video.